Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, let's get regional MPOs with Ellen Zavisca, Transportation Planning Manager for the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, also known as AMPO.
The Planning Commission podcast is a discussion you never even knew you needed. Sit back, join us for a conversation between a couple of old friends and their guests to talk about all the things that are happening in this wide-ranging profession called planning. Our views are our own and don't reflect those of any national planning organizations or any particular public agencies and only belong to us. So read your commission packet, know your Robert's rules, and enjoy this, the Planning Commission podcast.
Let's take roll. Commissioner Minshaw, you here?
Present.
Commissioner Kostelik, don't even answer. We know you're here. I'm here. All right, that's good. Let's move forward with our agenda today. It's our discussion item, our whiskey pairing, our interview in our lightning room. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Good timing. Okay. Just as a reminder, you can find all our past meetings on our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Head over to YouTube, Amazon, Apple. Please subscribe, like, and give us feedback and email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. Today's episode, we're going to talk all about MPOs. Oh, buddy. What in the heck is an MPO? I think some of our audience probably doesn't really know, especially if you're not in an urban area or necessarily in the transportation game. But incredible importance all across this country for a number of reasons. I'm going to ask a discussion item question momentarily, but Commissioner Kostelik, I've been hearing you ramble on about this for about 15 years. Here's your moment to shine, buddy. However, I'm going to put some borders on you. We're getting into an elevator. That elevator is going from the ground floor to the only 10 floors, and it takes no more than 3 seconds per floor. I need you to explain the requirements of an MPO in that amount of time. Here we go. The door, we're getting in. The door is shutting. Go.
I think you can ask most MPO board members of the requirements of an MPO, and they'd probably fail that quiz.
You're
Second
on,
floor
you're
already.
on second floor.
Pass a tip, pass a metropolitan transportation plan, pass a unified planning work program, and all kinds of other alphabet soup.
That's all you got? I thought you've been practicing this speech for so many years, and the standard line of the specific requirements, that's what you're going to go with. All right, well, you had your chance, but you blew it. There's tips. Yep. We know
I've still got Olivia Newton-John on the brain from your intro. So
they have to convene the great, wonderful decision makers and thinkers of a region, right? They have to do all kinds of wonderful things. Public involvement, which I've never envied an MPO for having to do public involvement on a long-range plan, man. That's hard. Other things that we'll get into momentarily. All right. Well, with that, let's go with our discussion item. I guess more of a serious one. What is the importance and what are the challenges of long-range planning? Long-range planning, man. We're talking like out there, buddy. 20, 30, sometimes even longer than that. It just depends kind of year. Trying to look into that crystal ball and think it's the epitome of the word planning, right? Trying to think ahead and forge a future that we think will match with the needs of that generation as we go. What's the importance and what are the pitfalls or challenges of that? And truth be told, one of our commissioners ran an MPO, so I can't wait to hear her perspective. All right, go for it. What do you guys got?
All right, I'll kick in. So I'm a pretty good convert to the importance of MPOs after working at 2 of them. Dawn and I've had lots of these spirited conversations, but there are a lot of drawbacks and challenges. I think the importance is if we aren't actually planning that far in the future, things just happen to us. I mean, we all know parenting in life, days are short, days are long and years are short, right? Like you blink. And we were just talking about this the other day, you blink and you're like, where did almost 20 years go? So if you're really not planning in a future, it's just going to happen. As well as we all know governments are not always the best on their own coordinating. And the more people you get in the room with ideas, sometimes the longer that takes, but it also gets better results. So I always think the regional coordination is the most important. Also, I had a boss who always used to say this, that a vision or a plan without funding is a hallucination. And so MPOs, have a lot of coordination around funding. And I know we always joke as the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, but beyond just the bureaucracy, it actually matters because things take a long time to get done, especially when federal government's involved. So a couple drawbacks. Transportation takes a long time to get done, especially when the federal government's involved. And then also just planning, it's hard to be relevant to the public in general, even government, when, people don't get excited until you've got paint marks in their front yard and something happens, bad at an intersection. They don't want to talk about 5 years later. So I think that's the hardest thing.
I think the
Okay.
opportunities are probably outside some of those core roles, but what MPOs are able to do, for example, here in the Boise region, our Metropolitan Planning Organization covering 2 counties has a pedestrian and bicyclist counting program where they have counters, they put them out at regular locations, they loan them to agencies to use and things like that. And I don't know that that would be happening without that MPO in this region. I think the challenges come back, like you said, Sabrina, to those core functions and anything in long range planning. I mean, how much do you trust the 10th day of the 10-day weather forecast?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look at the factors and variables that are there. So in trying to project out, now we're probably looking at horizon years of 2050 and what's going to change. I remember hearing the story that when people were looking at population projections in the early 1900s and going, how are we going to transport all these people? They were also concerned of how much horse manure is going to be in the streets to transport all these people by the year 1920 or the year 1930. Well, technology changed that in a major way. So we don't know what's out there that can definitely disrupt the paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I think this is about the epitome of the word planning, and the other than maybe a general comprehensive plan, this is it. This is the sort of Super Bowl, if you will, of long range visions and trying to craft what that might look like. So I think it's incredible. I do think it's important in a lot of ways. I would say, to add to the conversation, I think MPOs, one of the things that they can do that's I've seen some good examples is convening people from the region, even outside of their standard monthly or quarterly meetings, for information, for just dissemination of market conditions and trends. And I think that's a really good, role for the MPO to try to fill, and just keep those decision makers up to speed on what's going on, and maybe pull them back to earth a little bit by having discussions that are a little more germane to either the region, the state, or what have you. A challenge that I don't know that I think, Sabrina, you kind of hit on this, and I'd love to hear from our guest momentarily if I'm right on this. I suspect a challenge for MPOs is getting the next generations of planners interested in this subject, because the career rewards are, to me in any way, I think much harder and much less tangible, because we're kind of, as soon as that long range plan is done, basically we start it again and then start it again. And as soon as the ink is barely even dry. And so seeing those things and all that hard work actually come to be, I think I know how I feel about that. My favorite part I've mentioned before is not always the planning part. It's holding a can of spray chalk and going out into a street and seeing the instant results of drivers change their behavior, so that a mayor standing next to me goes, holy cow, we can do something like that, but in the next couple of years, more permanent. That's, for me, I love it. Maybe it's because I'm an idiot and my attention span is out of a gnat, but I think that this TikTok type of world that we're in, these sound bites, I just wonder, and I'm concerned that the pool of interested planners that maybe are needed into the MPOs, which are only going to continue to grow because of the current federal 50,000 population threshold, I am concerned that is going to come home to roost at some point, and we're going to be really short staffed. But anyway, so
I think the
those are mine.
generational thing's an interesting one, because if you think at least of maybe a pivot in the generations in terms of transportation preferences and choices being more multimodal, And in a lot of cases, the MPO is almost like the paperwork arm of the state DOT, and throw in a lot of highway planning in there. So I think there's a fulfillment element there that I think for me personally would have been a barrier being in that situation long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
and
we'll get into, go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm sure we're going to ask our guest a bit more about it, but something you both brought up is what's the role of education for those planners, right? Like a lot of the new planners really enjoy trying to change the world through influencing others. And I wonder if that's something that MPOs are leaning into more.
Yeah, good question. If anybody's going to have that answer, it's certainly going to be our guest momentarily. All right, next on our agenda, let's get into the whiskey pairing. Don, what do you have?
Oh, I think Ellen had one for today as our guest. So I think, are we going to bring her in and have her go over it?
Yeah, let's do that. Let me have her join us in just a minute, real quick. As we get her in, let me just quickly thank our partners. We would like to take a quick moment, thank Plan Edison for supporting today's podcast. If you're looking to sharpen your urban planning skills and advance your planning career, head on over to Plan Edison Courses, which offers over 300 courses on cutting-edge planning topics and skills such as parking reform, missing middle housing, equity analysis, and climate resilient. Visit courses.planedison.com/PC10 to take advantage of an exclusive offer for Planning Commission podcast listeners. Okay, let's introduce our guest today. Our guest is the Transportation Planning Manager for the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or AMPO, Ellen Zavisca. Ellen, you with us?
I am, yeah. I'm glad.
All
I'm
right.
glad to be here with you today.
Okay. Welcome in. And first of all, let's just tell us a little bit about you and how you got into, the planning game and MPOs. But before you jump into that, what is the whiskey pairing du jour? What are we drinking today?
Well, I was excited when Don asked me this question because I had the opportunity to have my first Boulevardier this week, which is a fancy drink involving Maker's Mark and Campari and sweet vermouth. It's a variation of the Negroni, so if you have an opportunity to try one of those, I recommend. And of course, just, straight up Maker's Mark. There's nothing, you can't go wrong with that.
Can't go
after
wrong with that at
hours,
all.
of course.
And the fact that Boulevard is in the title, and that's kind of
Right,
a more desirable
absolutely.
street. I mean, we could have done the Strodemopolitan, but it's got different ingredients.
Absolutely.
Sounds delicious. All right. Who are you? Where are you coming from? And why MPOs?
Well, those are big questions. So just a little bit about me. I joined AMPO last summer. And before that, I spent about 18 years working on the staff of an MPO in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I've got a pretty good experience there. I actually interned at an MPO when I was in grad school up in South Bend, Indiana as well. I think MPOs are, like you guys talked about, they're a great forum for bringing people together and sharing information around a region. There's definitely a lot of challenges in that you're trying to look, 25, 30 years into the future. And that's hard, it's hard to engage people about next week, let alone that far out, like Sabrina said, when people start seeing, lines drawn on the street. We used to talk about how, people only get interested in a transportation project when there's bulldozers nearby. So trying to talk about that stuff long range, but you do have to talk about it long range because it takes a long time to build this stuff. And that's one of the big challenges that MPOs are dealing with. Projects that involve state and federal funding, and those funding sources can take forever to get anything done. Even stuff that's not a highway, even a sidewalk, a bike lane, a path, even the good stuff. Not that highways are not good stuff, but you know what I mean. Even the stuff that people get excited about can take forever because there's state and federal money involved. And that's a big challenge. And that's something that, we're trying to work with MPOs and states and the feds to try to chip away at, for sure.
So Ellen, give us your perspective. Pretend you're explaining this to someone who knows nothing about MPOs and transportation planning. Because
Sure.
When we start talking about MPOs, the acronym as the word, we're all insider baseball on it. So tell us more about why MPOs, kind of where did they start? What's changed since they were established?
Well, I mean, I think for your listeners who don't who don't know anything about them, you probably, if you're in a city or even a larger town, you probably have an MPO in your community. Like you guys mentioned, it's any region with, any population density and a population greater than 50,000 people. And it's a good, it's a good group to get to know, look at their website, look at what their plans are, look at who their staff are. If you're interested in influencing transportation in your region, and you're hopefully already talking to the folks at your city or your county or whatever, it's also good to get to know your MPO. The smaller ones might have only 1 or 2 staff members. The larger ones, will have dozens, if not a lot more. But it really is, a way to convene folks regionally and make these long range plans and figure out where all this, federal money or state money that's coming into a region is going to get spent. But they can do a lot of other programming things. You guys talked about bike ped counts, which is a really great program. One of the things I worked on when I was with the Knoxville MPO was creating a huge database of bicycle and pedestrian crashes. And then we added in all fatal and life-altering crashes to that database. And, prior to the state standing something up pretty recently, that was really the only place, the local governments, didn't have the time or resources to put that together. And that's something that we were able to bring to discussions about all sorts of safety concerns and use for grant writing and all sorts of stuff. So there's lots that MPOs can do that, is a huge benefit to the community, in addition to the stuff that they've got to do. So you guys mentioned that there's some core documents that an MPO has to produce: a long range plan, a short range plan, a work program, a public participation plan, all that stuff. So those are just things you can check out on their website and like I said, get to know your MPO.
So tell us a bit more about the other acronym we keep throwing around. Tell us about AMPO and then what AMPO does. And maybe as part of that, reflect back on what's been changing that, AMPO keeps a pulse on that. So what's been changing for MPOs?
So AMPO is the Association of MPOs, organizations based in DC, although we've got staff all over the country. Many of us are remote. And we really are, an advocacy group for the MPO community. So there's more than 400 MPOs across the country. And we work with, Federal Highway Administration, US DOT, Federal Transit folks, to communicate the needs of MPOs, members of Congress, folks like that. And then, just sharing information among MPOs, because it's really easy to get into a silo and not know, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how do we improve how MPOs function across the US. And they're all, each MPO is unique in some regard, in terms of where they're housed and how they're governed and stuff like that. So that makes it a challenge to learn from each other. But there's certainly a lot changing. This administration, the new-ish transportation bill has meant for a lot of changes. There's a much bigger focus on safety, which is huge to see, focusing not just on the larger MPOs are required to look at traffic congestion, which of course is worth looking at. But traffic congestion is one of those things that's kind of always going to be with us and is a sign that, people want to be in a place. And if you go about just addressing traffic congestion, you're going to keep, widening roads and making things sometimes less safe and less accessible for people who don't have cars. So this focus on safety, hopefully to balance out that congestion focus, is very welcome. And, we have a role in just, trying to, because they're already talking about, even though the transportation bill is fairly new, they're already talking about reauthorization of what's going to come next.
When is that up?
Oh gosh, I should know that. It's a couple of years. So of course they're writing the bill already. There's conversation about it in committees, and everyone's trying to influence that, and we are as well. So that MPOs, and there's a big fight over, like, does the money go through the state DOT and then to the MPO and then to the locals? Some of it, a little bit more, is shifting, going directly to the MPOs, which sometimes the states don't love. So those are just, some of the conversations happening, and it seems rather esoteric, but it, kind of affects what gets built and what doesn't. So,
well, I think that that leaping of the states, given some of the historic roles, and I would say even the reason MPOs were founded in some ways to be checks and balances against DOTs is a good thing, and goes back to local control, which I think a lot of people would say is fundamental. So you mentioned it's hard to get people to care about stuff for next week. How does an MPO impact a person's daily life?
Well, that's a good question. You know, like I said, we're working on, you know, all sorts of, you know, transportation projects that are coming down the pike. So that definitely affects how people get around. Sorry, I just had a message pop up on my screen. You know, we try to share, you know, best practices around the region so that folks can learn from each other. Hopefully, you know, do things in a way that's, you know, less disruptive for folks' day-to-day life. Yeah, I mean, if we can do additional projects like, you know, more bike ped projects, work together to you know, bring together Greenway planning around the region, stuff like that, I think they can have a really positive impact.
So, I mean, I a while back was asked to be on the public participation committee of our regional MPO, and it was it was a challenge, you know, getting people. I think like Don's kind of alluding to of them understand it, getting the citizens of a region to understand what and how an MPO can affect their daily lives. But when we think about what's the best practice? What are you seeing? I mean, as a MPO, I'm sure you're seeing all kinds of great ways that certain MPOs are doing it right, and maybe some that aren't so well, a little bit kind of behind the times in some ways. What are the ones that are doing it well doing to get people to participate, especially in this world where we have, I think, really in the last decade awoken to environmental justice issues and equity and that sort of thing? What are we doing well? What are the ones that are doing? Are there, and maybe there's some best in class MPOs that you can give a shout out to?
Well, I don't know if I want to name names because then I, you know, leave some folks out, of course. But, you know, I think the best approach that an MPO or any, you know, government can take is really, you know, kind of meeting people where they're at. And that's hard to do because people are, you know, it's hard to find them. They're on so many different social media platforms. Using, you know, sort of traditional media is not a great way to meet, to connect with people. But you've got to do it. I mean, the traditional way to do a long range plan process is to have a bunch of meetings around your region and you set up your screen and you do your PowerPoint and 4 people are there. And, you know, it's not a good way to do it. So the best MPOs and other folks are, you know, they're taking to different social media platforms. We've heard of MPOs using, you know, Reddit and TikTok, in addition to, you know, Instagram and other things that have been around longer, Nextdoor, Facebook. Obviously, you know, there's very different audiences, different vibes for those. But you know, you just got to figure out a way. And then out in the community too, you can't strictly be online, but trying to figure out where folks are already gathered for something and get in front of them for, you know, a few seconds or a few minutes to talk about something that's going on and try to get them to do a survey or something else. It's just tough. I don't know if anyone's perfected it, but there's certainly folks who are trying to do it better.
Do you think the challenge of that is maybe even greater, even just that concept of take it to where the people are? How do you do that in the Atlanta region? How do you do that in Southern California, in Houston? Right. And I think certainly the social media piece is there, but yeah, how does that differ from a small MPO or just a city neighborhood plan or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's way more difficult, right? Because it's long range. Again, it's, you know, that neighborhood plan might be talking about, you know, here's something that's coming next year. We want to hear what you think about it. And it's a lot more concrete, so to speak. But, you know, the long range plan is, you know, 20 years of projects and who knows what's going to happen and when. And, you know, like you said, you know, the Atlanta region's huge, you know, Southern California, something like that. So you do rely more and more on driving people to, your social media, getting stuff on YouTube, getting stuff, wherever you think people's eyeballs and attention are going to be for a few seconds. But, you often do end up doing a planning process with, if you're lucky, maybe a couple thousand people weighing in. And that's not great, but sometimes it's the best you can do. And of course, the MPOs are working with, we didn't really talk about sort of the structure of them. There's a policy board or an executive board that's made up of like mayors and city managers that the MPO staff kind of answers to. And, ideally, you're hoping that those elected officials are representing the interests of the folks who elected them. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But that's another way people can influence their MPO. Talk to your local elected officials, make sure you vote in those local elections, because they're making those decisions that, are going to affect the whole community for decades.
It's like we're still waiting for that MPO to have that TikTok go viral, and then you'll be prime time with it, right, Chris?
Exactly.
I got to give a shout out to, I know someone who listens to this podcast, good old Andrew O'Connor. Hey, Andy, you know you're listening. Andy had a horror story. Andy was a planner that we worked with all collectively at a transportation agency years ago. And oh my gosh, we had at that time, doing it very conventional 15 years ago or whatever, get the easels, get the foam core, go to a library or school at 6 o'clock and hope for the best. And I recall, I'll never forget this, man. He manned his little station like a good soldier and did what he did. And some older guy came up to him and started physically poking him directly in the chest. Well, Andy's no longer in planning, and he got into real estate. And I think
you were going to say in prison. Yeah.
Investment banking or something in that realm. But
it makes a lot more money. It makes a lot more money than us as planning.
I don't know. Maybe he's still getting poked in the chest. I don't know. But I say that because I'm so happy that for the most part, I haven't seen too many. I mean, they're still happening, I know, but that approach of get the easels, get the tripod, that sort of thing. And there's some instances where maybe that's appropriate, especially in a smaller community or what have you, where maybe that's a great way. If it's legit, it's legit. But man, I'm so happy to see, and I know that we can attest to this. Gosh, going out, throwing a pair of shorts and a t-shirt on and putting a table out at a festival and having dialogue with people who are just having a good time and, for 5 minutes kind of a thing. It's like, gosh, I think that's just such a better way of doing things. And I know I'm guessing a lot of MPOs have seen some success by just toning it down, and just going, like Dawn said, go to where people are. And so that way you don't get poked in the chest. Right. And so just a thought there, kind of an awareness, I think, of our industry. Sabrina, you had a question?
I do. And I'm asking this as really the only public still planner in the room, and knowing that I've worked with 2 MPOs. One thing I think that many of us struggle with, both at the MPO or when we're working with the local government, is really talking about relevancy, right? And you all are talking about it from the public, but what about from the actual like tangible implementation side, right? So I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about what would happen or what does happen if there's not an MPO or the MPO isn't engaged, right? I mean, in a real tangible way. So maybe when states and cities don't play well together or local governments aren't engaged, what either happens or could happen? And talk about that like in the role of what could an MPO do?
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me of those voiceovers for scary movies where people go, in a world without MPOs, what would that? Yeah, that would be
That should have been the
terrifying,
intro.
wouldn't it?
That should have been the intro.
We'll go back and do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly instances where MPOs for whatever reason haven't been effective in getting folks to work together. And yeah, that can lead, because these transportation issues are regional, our economies are regional, our flow of workers from homes to jobs is regional, freight is regional, all these things. So one of the really fun things I worked on when I served at the MPO in Knoxville was bringing together regional Greenway planners. Because the region has an amazing trail network, and people don't care whether they're in the city of Knoxville or the county or the next city over or whatever. They just want to be able to figure out where they're going on the trail, where the parking is, where the restrooms are. And, we were able to work on a consistent system for signage and wayfinding and all sorts of cool stuff. And then again, making sure that the two trails were going to meet up, like when they built the Transcontinental Railroad from like one coast to the other, and they meet up in the right spot. And their tracks are the same width apart and all that good stuff. It's amazing they did that without MPOs. But when you don't have that, you probably get a lot more conflict between, the state and the cities. A lot of states, and it's political, of course, what's going on at the state level, regional, local, everything. State governments sometimes are dominated by like more rural interests, and then got the MPOs speaking for the urban areas and the mayors and stuff like that as well. So, ideally it's a good place for convening and conversation, and sometimes it's, not as relevant as it could be, and things aren't, things don't go as well as they could.
Yeah, I was thinking about some good examples, both for us here in Idaho and in Spokane, where I worked as well. I mean, everything from it's not always an MPO. I mean, we had a countywide highway district that working with the MPO really, yes, I know, crazy. We'll talk about that one later, but really leaned into even just construction mapping and coordinating of projects. Because like you just mentioned, if you're a person driving from your house to your work, for example, you don't really know. I mean, with annexations, you never know if you're in the city or the county or a highway district, or which is a state highway. And so just that creativity, like you said, of every being relevant of, where and how is an MPO helping with just who's constructing when, so you don't have an entire mile area, blocked off. Another example, and maybe you can think of another one like this, but I think our MPO in this area has done a good job of bringing together interest when multiple jurisdictions have a problem that involves somebody else. So for example, a lot of times it's related to, are they engaging with the railroad, right? Like the railroad's not allowing XYZ. Or how are they engaging with, how are we approaching irrigation districts, right? Everybody's not doing their own thing separately. When there's enough commonality, somebody can say, oh, we can leverage this. A letter to this group signed by 4 mayors is much different than one city trying to fight it at a time. Any other examples you've seen of that? Maybe even from when you were in Tennessee, or, y'all do great conferences about best practices. Like, give us one of like, this was a cool collaboration.
Oh, wow. Put me on the spot.
Sorry, those are the exciting ones, right? Like, how did they get it implemented?
Right. I mean, railroads are, can be notoriously difficult to work with. Utilities are another. I think the MPOs are great, because utilities are often driving where development's going to happen. Cities and counties can make their land use plans all day long, and then where development's going to happen is often influenced by, is there public sewer and water and Wi-Fi, and where are the schools getting built is another huge driver of development. And, if the MPOs can open up a conversation with the school district or districts and the public utilities so that there's better coordination, that can help the local governments tremendously in, better forecasting where development's going to happen, better shaping where development's going to happen, because we haven't gotten into this yet, but the land use and the transportation are completely connected, and too often I think, the transportation system is just trying to like chase after the sprawl that's happening and accommodate the sprawl, instead of going, well, what can we do to rein in that sprawl and help, have a more diverse development pattern, a more compact development pattern that then is served better by transit and bicycling in addition to driving. And too often, transit systems are brought in after the fact, and well, we moved the Social Security office to the middle of nowhere because we got a cheap piece of land. Yeah. Now you have to run a bus route there. I mean, we've seen those examples, and the bus system's like, we can't do that. You got to, but of course the Social Security office serves folks with disabilities and seniors, and some of those folks can't drive or shouldn't be driving. And, it's a good way to try to engage all those interests that, maybe don't want to play nice.
So that land use transportation thing, I mean, I think that's a huge one, and it ends up with everybody just pointing the fingers at the other because nobody really wants to stand up and try to get at those issues. Where do you see that going? Is there possibilities in legislation or things, or what's AMPO's stance on some better ways that can be done?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's in the most recent transportation bill, there's not a requirement, a suggestion that MPOs start looking at housing, which is, probably behind the curve, but definitely needed because, again, that's, where housing and schools and retail and jobs, that's all connected in terms of how those develop, and MPOs need to look at that. And of course, there's a huge housing shortage in a lot of regions, big and small across the country. And again, that can drive sprawl as people have to move further and out to be able to afford a place to live.
And I think it leads to unpredictability. If you're saying you're trying to project something 20 years down the road and you have this massive external influence that nobody's ready for, that 20-year plan might as well be written on an Etch-a-Sketch, right?
Right. You're trying to predict, Don, we've had these conversations about modeling for transportation and what an imperfect science it is. I've often said, if it was November of 2019, you couldn't have predicted what traffic was going to look like in April of 2020, right? Because we didn't see the pandemic coming. We didn't see that huge drop off in driving. And anything can, gas prices can affect that, the availability of vehicles, which we saw to some degree during the pandemic. So I think, one of the core things that MPOs do is try to model what the transportation needs are going to be 20 years down the road. And I think that's important, but I also think that folks need to take that with a grain of salt and know that that's one vision of the future. We're sort of extrapolating from the present, but we don't know what's going to happen next week or a year from now that could drastically change that for the better or for the worse. So, and we can also influence that with our policies, with where land use changes are happening. We can influence the transportation needs. And so we need to recognize that that's one vision of the future, but we could have an influence and have something different if we wanted to.
That's where we can nerd out, right? Is the model discussion and all the moving parts and all the inputs and the outputs. And, I know, and I appreciate where I can, hear your sentiment about that is a challenge. It is a house of cards and the window's always open, right? And it's that breeze could come anytime. And I know, like, my personal experience as a member of our Planning and Zoning Commission is that where I see it broken, frankly, this connection, it's not just the MPO, but it's also the land use side, is the difference between the current zoning and the future land use map. That's it. That's where I would say is the root, because if it's residential or high residential in the future land use map, but that means that the zoning can be 3 different categories. Well, how the heck does that influence the TAZ projections that you're getting at in the model? Because a zoning change all of a sudden blows up one particular geography, which then can blow up others. And those rezones happen quite a bit, especially, I would argue, in the last few years, as we have recognized in this country, coast to coast, the massive shortfall of residential units that we have, and cities going, wow, we got to get out of the way and we need to allow more housing. So you want to come in and build more housing? Heck yeah, rezone the heck out of it. We'll get it to you and let's go. And boom, there goes that model, right? There goes that TAZ projection for 20, 30 years from now. And
TAZ
it's like
is
Transportation Analysis Zone, which is a micro puzzle piece in a major puzzle.
All right.
That's the best
But
way.
one clarification, Chris. I mean, you talked about cities. I mean, in our area, and again, speaking as a local planner, that also goes back to what you're saying about sprawl, right? I mean, because when there's such areas, especially in the West, where there's such regions of high demand outside of cities, and that they're going further and further to get more affordable housing, we're struggling that with our region of how do you do that and respond to the demand of the market, and at the same time you compare it to what's been planned. We don't have roadway systems planned. I mean, shout out to Compass in this area. Things like development monitoring reports of just holding up a mirror of like, here's what we as a region said, here's what's happening. Now what? You got to adjust one or the other. It's huge. And yeah, so here we go. See, we could geek on this for a while.
So here's where I'll go. If you have any response to that, Ellen, that'd be welcome. But I would also add, maybe just a follow up into that is, how do MPOs hold cities and regions accountable on the land use side and go, hey, man, this isn't the plan that you said you were going to have. So how does that dynamic work?
Well, and again, every MPO is different. The planners are fortunate if they're, even invited to the meetings where those rezonings are being discussed. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. I was fortunate to be at an MPO that was embedded within a city county planning agency. So sometimes we did get to talk about those things, but again, they were more of the micro level of, how many access points is this new Chick-fil-A going to have on the on the highway, as opposed to what's the bigger impact of this development and the next one and the next one and the next one. And again, Don was getting into the weeds with the TAZs, but one of the major flaws is that the models generally just show trips between one zone and another, right? Assuming that everyone's making some sort of longer distance trip and presuming they're in a car. We don't usually capture those shorter trips, probably the more walking trips or bike trips or even transit trips that occur within each TAZ. And so again, the model is weighted toward those longer trips, toward those work trips, not reflecting the shorter trips that people might take. And again, when we have better land use, right? When we have like stores that you can walk to and a school that you can walk to, that's often not even accounted for in the models that we're running. And that's something we're trying to improve too. I should mention that AMPO is working with a consortium of MPOs and DOTs across the country to create something called ActivitySim, which is a activity-based open source travel model that is being, kind of gradually stood up at some MPOs alongside their model. Some of them are shifting to ActivitySim. Anyone can, look at it and download it, play around with it, who's into travel modeling. But it's a good alternative to sort of that traditional model that, again, has its uses, but is largely only accounting for certain trips of greater length and work trips and things like that, and not accounting for what's really going on in the world.
So I'm a big fan for people who are listening to the podcast of implementation. Like, what does it mean to actually implementation for the people that live there? So I want to come back to funding, another one of my passions. Talk to us about, and I hear this question a lot when I worked at MPOs. Well, why can't the money just go directly to the city or the county or the highway district, whoever it is that's doing it? Why does it have to funnel through multiple organizations? And then also speak a little bit about what's changing with funding coming from the feds. And or maybe just like, why is it more expensive to do things with federal funds? Is it because there's multiple layers? What's kind of the trend and what's happening around the money side of it?
Yeah, we could do a whole hour on that, but I'll hit your last question first, which is why it takes, why does it take longer? Why does it cost more? Obviously those are intertwined, right? The more time you spend doing something, the longer it takes. There's just a lot of hoops to jump through with federal money, and even with state money. And you see, a lot of cities that are trying to move quicker on things, like cities that are doing Vision Zero work or other, safety focused work, will try to do stuff with local money rather than with federal money, because the federal money just, you have to do all this environmental, you have to follow NEPA, you have to jump through all sorts of hoops to spend it. And those rules were put in place for good reasons. But just the way it's implemented, it just, things take forever. There can be lawsuits. There's long environmental studies that have to go into things. There's right of way processes that have to be followed that are very stringent. So, again, if local governments are trying to move faster on things, they're oftentimes looking at their own funding sources and doing things like a special tax that funds transportation, or just using their general fund. But yeah, there's a big conversation about more money coming directly from the feds to the MPOs, sometimes directly to cities. One of the big new programs is the Safe Streets and Roads for All, and that's one that's kind of bypassing the states. States can be partners on those projects, but the main funding is going just to localities or to MPOs. And that's, again, we haven't really seen implementation yet, and to see how quickly that moves, that's going to be really interesting to see. And I know there were some elements of your question that I missed, but they've escaped my head.
Well, I think, we talked about in the opening, the next generation. We talked about that viral video. You're making the TikTok to sell an MPO career to the generation that's in school right now. What are you telling them?
Oh my gosh, I'd have to understand TikTok better, and I'd have to be able to dance.
I can't, so that's all right.
Okay.
He can wait. He can clog, however.
I can clog. Yeah, that's true.
Wow. I'm learning new things about you guys. This is awesome.
Well, you know where I
Still
grew
to-
up, so
Yeah.
Still to be proven, however. So just saying.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, I would get Don to come on TikTok with me and do his clogging moves.
I can baton
And
twirl. I can twirl
yes,
baton. Okay.
Sabrina would twirl the baton. We get lots of attention for that. And I would say, that this is a way to influence transportation, to do good things for transportation. And if I don't know, does it sound bad to say if you don't do it, someone else will, who, maybe does, maybe isn't coming from as good a place as you are. Because, MPOs are having to account for greenhouse gas emissions now, opening our eyes more to, the impact of transportation on climate change, which is just great. But it's a very controversial thing as well.
Well,
I would add to that. Oh, go ahead, Sabrina.
I was just say decisions are made by those who show up, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the whole premise
Right.
of us saying, like, how do you reach people?
Right.
I would look at it too. If you're able to come out of school or go into an MPO, you're probably getting a chance to do actual planning more
Right.
so than like a city planning department where you may be stuck on the counter doing,
Yes.
development reviews. So I think there's an applicability thing there if you're truly into planning that can be applied there. I think that's a great appeal for
Right.
it.
And not just approving subdivision regs, reg updates and
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I approved 6 fence permits this week.
There's
All right,
your
that's-
Jamie.
That's a
That's
little
your TikTok.
that's tainted for all of us who are still trying to recruit planners to do development reviews. So for all the listeners,
I
a
was
lot
gonna
of
say
joy
that's-
in
just a
development
lot of
review.
backstabbing going on here. I love it.
A lot of joy in development review.
Since TikTok isn't supposed to be prolonged and so forth, Don just hit it. It's planning. That's it. Just double planning, and that's the best way to describe it. If you're really
It's
into
planning.
planning.
Yeah. Well,
All
and
right,
again,
well-
if
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, if again, if you're just a member of the community and you want to influence this stuff, again, getting to know who your MPO is and what they're doing is great, because you're going to be one of the few people that probably show up to that, and you can have an outsized voice.
The first MPO public meeting I was ever involved with as a Cub planner was on a triple digit day here in Boise. And when I got to the district office of our DOT, which the door was facing south, it burned my hand. And I'm like, there's not going to be many people here. And it was for the transportation improvement program. There was 7 people, 3 were MPO board members, and the other 4 were consultants looking for future work.
Are you sure there wasn't holy water involved, Don?
It matters, right? Show up for anybody who's listening to this. I mean, if you're in a region that happens to be under the jurisdiction of an MPO, I know recently I can tell you that, we had a particular project that didn't go well, didn't get good reactions, and we made a few calls and got folks to write the right letters and emails, and it changed, and now it's up for reconsideration. And I think that I think that those things can happen because of exactly what you described, is that there isn't very much input. And so when there is a groundswell, I think people are kind of taken aback and go, whoa, whoa,
Mhm.
whoa, whoa, what's going on here? So it's an opportunity to make that happen. But all right, let's turn our attention to the lightning round. Good conversation. We're just gonna blast you with some silly questions. I'm gonna hit us up with the first two. I think you said South Bend, Indiana, and that's the home of Notre Dame. Notre Dame, right? So first of all, I know you got Pete Buttigieg on speed dial for one thing, but I'm gonna put you on the spot with this. Notre Dame plays the University of Tennessee. You're a Knoxville girl now. Who's winning that game?
Who's winning? Well, I think
Who are you rooting for?
I'd be lucky to know the game's even happening. I mean, Notre Dame, of course, has touchdown Jesus in their end zone, so they've got that on their side. But I think UT would probably be favored in that game. I think it would get good ratings, and of course, UT has been doing a little bit cheating lately. So
Yeah.
although
in the
Jesus will know.
NCAA, that's pretty blurred.
Yeah.
I don't know. Touchdown Jesus will come down and smite thee and make, get Notre Dame a few more touchdowns there. All right, next question. Dawn has tried to convince me that the middle word of this is the word and. I've been to the South, lived in the South. I'm not convinced. I'm pretty sure it's just a guttural meaning shrimp grits. It's not shrimp and grits. He's never going to convince me of that. So my question to you is, shrimp, I'll give it the Costly treatment, shrimp and grits, or Chicago deep dish pizza. What are you going with?
Oh, I thought I was going to have to weigh in on the and part.
Well, you can do that too. You're the final judge and jury on that.
I mean, I think it's like biscuits and gravy. You're saying biscuits and, it's biscuits and shrimp and.
See? That's what I'm saying.
I'll have to clog for you now.
I'm with you. I just say shrimp grit.
It's together. Yeah. It's not an or the other. It's a,
Yeah. I don't know. I like them both. I'd go with shrimp and grits. It's a little bit lighter. Deep dish is good, but it's, you need to like put on sweatpants and lie around for like a week after doing that.
And as Jon Stewart famously said, it's a casserole.
Yeah.
It's not a pizza.
All right, Don.
What's your favorite ride at Dollywood?
I haven't been.
Ooh.
Oh.
But I have been to the Titanic Museum, which is just down the road. My daughter's a huge history nerd and also of natural and man-made disasters. So we have haunted the Titanic Museum more than once, and it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
All right, I have a museum follow-up one. So to talk about that, you said you are working remote, but you have to go to DC a couple times a year since that's where AMPO is based. So when you travel to DC, tell me the best and the worst like museum or attraction you've been to in DC.
Oh gosh. I mean, you can't go wrong with the Smithsonian stuff. The Museum of Native American History or Indigenous History, I forget what it's called, is amazing. And the cafeteria is amazing as well. Where they had some sort of like fry bread or something that was just terrific. And I recently went to the National Building Museum. It was all about like architecture and stuff. It was really cool. And the gift shop was terrific.
Lots of Lego.
It's the Urban Planners gift shop over there.
Yeah.
But it's not free. It's not like the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
Stuff. What's the strangest place you've ever done a public meeting?
Before I left Knoxville, we were doing some planning in a little town called Townsend, Tennessee, which is right on the edge of the Smokies. Don, you and I have hit Townsend. So we were back in Townsend to talk about that same Greenway connection, and there were people there sort of with pitchforks for us. But the mayor liked us. But the interesting thing about the venue is that the town hall is frequently visited by a bear that likes to hang out there. So sometimes the security has to chase away a bear so that people can come to the public meetings in Townsend, Tennessee.
All right, I got one for you. And I've thought about this one myself. So most people don't get out of college and go, I want to be an MPO person when I grow up. So if you were to reset yourself, what would be a dream career that you would pick?
Oh gosh, lounge singer would be up there, although I might be aging out of that. And the other thing I was thinking about in college was like, I was a history major, so going into like being an archivist or something like that, I still like digging through old papers and photos and
That's
stuff
awesome.
like that. Yeah.
Lounge singer, and the title of this, I mean, you heard me say it, right? Let's get regional. Would you actually go out and do the Olivia Newton-John "Let's Get Physical" in that lounge?
Can you
What's
just can you sing it for us? Can we end the interview with you singing it?
No, you
Let's
can't.
get regional, regional.
Wow, I need to
get regional.
That was awesome.
Don's putting on his unitard as we speak. I mean,
I've been known to do a mic test by breaking into song at public meetings.
very good, very good. I think that's a first for our show. So
That's
All
right. I was
right.
going to ask her special talent since mine is clogging and Sabrina's is baton twirling. So now we know it.
that makes quite the
Mhm.
show. I'll just sit in the back and produce it all. You guys can get up there and, I mean, come on, clogging and twirling and singing. That's quite the talents you guys got.
Guaranteed to go viral.
Yeah, there's your TikTok moment. All right, Ellen Zavisca, Transportation Planning Manager for Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk with us and all about MPOs. So appreciate your time.
It's great
Thanks,
being
Ellen.
with you. Thank you.
All right. So as a reminder to our listeners, head on over to the website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Subscribe, like, send us an email. Remember, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. Commissioners, can I get a motion to adjourn?
But we're having so much fun. All right, so moved.
I'm going to second that. Second that.
That song is going to be in everyone's head for the
I
rest
got to
of
drive
the
to
day.
Salt Lake City. That's going to be in my head for 5 hours.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, yep, past episodes, video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to tweet at us, go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.